the caste system has not only led to social but economic and political inequalities. The castes which were docile and submissive have become more assertive and militant recently. The theories of organization of caste defined purely by hierarchy and purity are no longer sustainable because of the assertiveness of the low caste identity in contemporary times. According to the sociologist Louis Dumont, the caste system in India was defined in terms of pure hierarchy in which the Brahmins occupied the topmost position, and the rest of the castes fell in line behind the Brahmins, completely agreeing with the ideology of hierarchy. This is why he called the Indian society Homo Hierarchicus. The two extreme ends of this hierarchy are the pious Brahmins and the impure Untouchables, thereby making purity and pollution the bedrock of the hierarchy of the caste system. Politics and wealth have only an interstitial role in this hierarchy. However, Dipankar Gupta argues that this theory of pure hierarchy is failing, because each caste had ideological underpinnings from which they drew their symbolic energy for political and economic mobilizations and hence were able to value themselves deeply. For instance, the Julaha caste can be seen as representing their origins and history differently and simultaneously glorifying their own lineage. This is precisely what Dwivedi argues when he says that the weaving castes never liked to be represented as inferior to Brahmins. In fact, they called themselves Brahmins at times. He further argues that Dumont was aware of the parcelization of pure hierarchy into competing blocks, but he failed to provide a reason for the same. Another attack that comes to Dumont's theory is from Andre Beteille, who argues that the caste system in India is leading to disparate inequalities. Highlighting the problems of comparative sociology, Beteille argues that the hierarchical society like India is placed in opposition to the Homo Equalis societies that are zealously attached to the principle of equality. This comparison between the Homo Hierarchicus and Homo Equalis comes from the lack of understanding of the context of the former and prejudice towards the latter. The Western societies are the exemplar of the Homo Equalis, and the sociologists of the West accept the diverse views in the West, thereby making it more egalitarian in nature. However, when it comes to hierarchical societies, the Western scholars are satisfied with the less differentiated view of the latter. This allows the Western scholars to judge the hierarchical societies not based on their experience of the modern struggles against discrimination, but their image of the past. For instance, India's modern struggles against the inequalities of caste and untouchability have been pushed into the background, just to bring the hierarchical Varna and Caste system up front. This possibly arises from the anxiety of the West to show itself in the light of equality by using the non-West in the background, which reflects the built-in structures of inequalities. Therefore, Beteille suggests that the specifications of the society are to be understood in the light of both equality and inequality merging together to form a particular design. He simultaneously rejects Dumont's assertion that traditional India knew nothing about the values of equality and liberty. What Beteille brings to the fore is the point that before these categorizations of Homo Hierarchicus and Homo Equalis, one needs to study the context and traditions of the so-called hierarchical societies, because according to him, no society can lack in the conceptions of equality and justice. Every society therefore has some fundamental concept of equality. In this background, it becomes essential to study Kabir as a modern figure who was not only fighting against the oppressive caste system but the religion that sanctioned it. Kabir serves as an example that the idea of equality was not entirely absent in India. Besides Kabir, there were other poets of the medieval century that were arguing for a casteless society, and this is evident from the utopian society of Bighampura, which Ravidas had propounded. According to the hagiographies, Ravidas is considered the contemporary of Kabir, and one often finds stories of their debate on the Sagun and Nirgun Bhakti. Both Kabir and Ravidas belong to the low castes, where the former was a Julaha and the latter was a Kamar or a leather worker, and it is in their subalternity that one can see the anti-caste agenda. The city of Bighampura encapsulates the vision of a prosperous and equal society where, irrespective of caste and status, everyone walks together and freely. In a similar way, Kabir's city of Premnagar and Amarlok too is a utopian vision where love pervades every sphere, thereby bringing down the walls of hatred and discrimination. As rightly pointed out by Galen, reason and ecstasy formed the bedrock of these utopian visions of the subalterns, without access to any knowledge and privileges. They were trying to subvert the hegemonic Brahmanical traditions. Being aware of their positions in the society, the low-caste saints were trying to bring a radical transformation to Indian society. The utopias of the subaltern saints could be seen as posing an alternative society that was based on the understanding of history, and the way to achieve it was through reasonable actions. Whereas Brahmanism had no such vision of a just society, but in fact, they placed emphasis only on the deeply hierarchical society to be regulated by the Varna system. It is also important, therefore, to understand that the Varna system that sought to maintain stability and coherence in society was itself responsible for the rising inequalities. This is because, as Beteille would argue, the very criteria of evaluation that an organization sets for an individual is responsible for inequalities. For instance, the criteria for evaluation, on the basis of birth for the admission into the caste system, points towards the inherent tendency to be unequal. Therefore, this idea of evaluation is a social or cultural process, because this standard of evaluation is applied not only to the material things, but to the human beings, thereby making them part of the collective representations. This places the individual in a ranking order based on, for example, their birth in an Indian caste system. The envisioning of the utopia thus can also be seen in the form of dissent and social protest against the divisive forces prevalent during the medieval centuries. However, in the case of Kabir, it is important to remember that not only was he simultaneously envisioning an ideal simple state that is sohasthiti, which means true liberation, but he was directly engaging with the dominant forces and was not somebody who denied his material existence. In fact, he sought to acknowledge them and then tried to bring about a radical transformation. Therefore, when Galen argues that the lower caste saints' utopia of casteless society was to be accomplished through the reason-guided actions, because this utopia represented a combination of reason and ecstasy, Kabir actually is doing both, envisioning of an ideal city of Premnagar and Amarlok, and at the same time questioning the orthodox Brahmanical authorities. For instance, in his following verse he is seen to be questioning the very logic of caste-based inequalities. It's all one skin and bone, one piss and shit, one blood, one meat. From one drop, a universe. Who's Brahmin? Who's Shudra?